yoga in the past.
It's pretty general.
It's most of it very good. So this, one of the things I'm kind of introducing until people come in and it becomes 12 o'clock. One of the things that's interesting about, I have lived, about 20 years in India and about 25 years in the US, and I really, really, I belong to both of those cultures, not just one. One of the things that I find interesting about India is we have a very strong sense of lineage. In Sanskrit, lineage is parampara, that we always recognize that anything that we are practicing today probably has a long tradition of practice from a long time ago, and that's one way of looking at it. But a deeper aspect of it, which is not very obvious, is there is a recognition that we are probably not inventing anything new now, that we are refinding something that was invented before. Now sometimes this is done in a ridiculous way, saying that we already invented airplanes and things, that's ridiculous. But I'm saying in more of the inner teachings, that there is a sense that whatever we are practicing now has been around for a while. And we usually, even about 40, 50 years ago, when people introduce them to each other, usually the first thing they would ask is, well, who are your parents? And it's that sense. The parampara is a very big part of this particular culture, whereas the Western culture is more, tell me more about yourself, what work do you do? So it's, and neither is good nor bad, it's just a thing that I've noticed by having lived in both places for equal amounts of time. So when you think about something like yoga, it's very useful to ask, what is the parampara? Where did it come from? Why did somebody invent yoga? Why, and why was it invented here? It's an important thing, and mainly I'm talking about Hatha yoga. That is the set of asanas that we do, and most of you probably do pranayama at some point, that you closed your nose and breathed in one way or another. So where does it come from? Who invented it? And what does it tell us about the right way to practice it? That's what this talk is about, okay? So make sure that you can see at least parts of what goes on here. There's plenty of room. If you need to rearrange yourself, come to a place where you can see the TV better, okay? So now that Daya is here, we can get started officially. So when we think of Hatha yoga, we often think that it is bending your body in all kinds of unusual ways, or we think of it as very intense physical activity. Somebody needs to lose weight, to say, go and do yoga, right? Or somebody is very flexible, they say, wow, we must do a lot of yoga. That's the kind of feeling that we have. Or sometimes we think of yoga as something that you have back pain, somebody says, go and do yoga. Or your knee pain, or you're stressed out, somebody says, go and do yoga, right? Now, this is what Swami Kriyananda said about yoga. And I'll actually read it, this is very important. He says, yoga is probably the oldest science known to man. Swami writes this in The Art and Science of Raja Yoga. And he says, yoga comes to us from a higher age. Higher age means, say, something like Satya Yuga or Treta Yuga or something like that. It comes to us from a higher age. That's the second part. And he says the third one, yoga is something that you should experience yourself. Don't, just because the yoga teacher said you should do it, don't do this. Go prove it for yourself. It insists on direct proof. Okay? And the fourth thing he says is, whenever you do yoga, no matter if you're doing the breathing exercise, you're bending forward, standing on your head, Sirsasana, doesn't really matter. Everything you do, you have to affirm the presence of God within. Okay? So see the difference between what we normally think of as yoga, that it's physical activity, use it to lose weight, use it to get rid of your knee pain or back pain, or become more flexible, versus it's the oldest science known to man, coming from Satya Yuga maybe, and done to affirm the presence of the divine within, and you can prove it for yourself. See, this is what's unique about yoga. There are other traditions too. Tai Chi, for example, does something similar, though not to the same extent, that somebody says, yoga will make you more peaceful. You don't have to trust that somebody. You go do yoga. If you're more peaceful, continue doing it. If not, take a sleeping pill. It's up to you, right? So this insistent meaning, yoga has to be practiced, not read about. Many people come and ask me, what's the best book I can read about yoga? I say there are about 3 things wrong with that sentence. That you cannot read a book. It's not in a book. You cannot read about it. You can't think about it. You just have to do it. So what's the best book you can read about yoga? Well, do yoga and look in the mirror. That's the best book you can read about yoga. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So where did this come from? Who sat and invented it? And the third thing is, if yoga is from very long time ago, how did primitive people know to invent yoga? We often think that anything good has been invented in the last 300 years. And when it applies to, say, the medicines we take, at least the pills that we put in, and the tools that we use, that is probably true. Doesn't mean that it's good, but it's true. That, before 300 years, we probably didn't take ibuprofen for knee pain. We probably did something else. That's new. And before 300 years, there's probably not a car to drive on. But outside of that, it's really not true that all things that are good has been invented in the last 300 years. Okay? So let's look at it. Itihas, history. You look at any country's history. There is usually 3 or 4 different periods. One is, there is a ancient period. Everybody talks about it. In India, that we always say our ancient period is the Vedic period, where everything was perfect. That's what we aspire to. And then there is a classical period, where we know historically that there is evidence that it was a good time. For India, that is the Mauryan period. We had Chandragupta Maurya and then Chanakya and everybody. And we all look back and say, wow, that's the time that we know that it was really, really well. It's the classical period. And then there is a dark period, where all kinds of bad things happen. Okay? And then there is the modern period. Usually, it's the same in the West, that the ancient period in the West is something that came before Greeks. They say everything was great. And the classical period was Greek and Roman. And then you had the Dark Ages, and then you had the Reformation, Renaissance, Age of Enlightenment, and so on. Isn't that how history progresses? So it's the same for yoga. So you have to look at what is this ancient period where everybody talks about but nobody knows. So that period, we call it prehistory. The prehistory of yoga, lost in the mists of time. We can only speculate. And I'll share with you 3 pieces that we know for sure that yoga was already there. One, if you go to Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Sindhu, Saraswati, whatever you want to call that civilization now, that in that civilization, they found approximately 4,500 years ago, they found a seal, a mudra, the seal in which somebody, you can see that picture over here, it's somebody sitting in a yoga pose. The heels are coming down into the perineum and then they are sitting on their toes. And this is called as the Pashupati seal, that you can see around that there are animals. Do you see, can you imagine the animals around that? So this seal, this is called Bhadrasana. In yoga, this is called Bhadrasana, and you can open any yoga text, it's described there. And we have evidence for this at least 4,500 years ago. Okay? The oldest texts in India. Let me ask, what is the oldest written text? Yes, sir.
Rig Veda.
Rig Veda, well done. Well done. Everybody agree? Yeah? Well, it doesn't matter whether you agree or not, that's what we know to be the oldest. Okay, Rig Veda. So the oldest texts in India are the Vedas. Now, Vedas are interesting. Anybody here read a Veda, opened the Veda and kind of looked at what was in there? So can you say what parts Veda has?
4 parts.
4 parts, yes, yes, please.
4 Vedas are there.
4
Rig,
Vedas are
Yajur,
there.
Sama, and other.
Okay.
Yajur, Ayurveda, Yajurveda.
No,
No.
Veda is not.
Samaveda.
Other way.
Very good. Rig Ved, Yajurved, Samaved, Atharvaveda. Those are the 4. Now each of these has 4 parts. Okay? So there is the first part which is only filled with mantras. There, Gayatri mantra is one of them. Gayatri mantra comes to us from Rig Veda. Mahamrityunjaya mantra comes to us both from Rig Veda and Yajur Veda, and on and on. And then there is a second part. Those are called Brahmanas. Shatapatha Brahmana, for example, is a good example. That is the one where there is deep explanation of some of the mantras in the Vedas. The third part are called the Aranyakas. Aranyakas means once you are done with your family life, at some point you have to give it up and go into the forest. What do you do during the end of your life? How do you approach death in the right way? That's Aranyaka, that's the third part. And the fourth part, anybody know what the fourth part is?
Sannyasa.
Vedant, well done. And the other name for Vedant is Upanishad. Very good. So the fourth part of Veda is the end of the Veda. It's like how you open a textbook. There is a appendix. That's what the Upanishads are. The Samhitas, the mantras, are applicable to all parts of who we are. They apply to the heart quality of feeling, the mind quality of thinking, the pranic quality of resonance. They apply to all of those. The Brahmanas apply to the karmic quality. This is what you do. The Aranyakas apply to the renunciate, sannyas quality. The Upanishads apply to the mental quality. So that's why when we want to discuss Vedas, we often discuss about the Upanishads. Because when the mind comes in, it's Vedanta comes in. Everybody with me? The oldest of the Upanishads is called the Chandogya Upanishad. It's part of the Rig Veda. There is not much yoga that's described in there. But Yajur Veda has a very famous Upanishad. It's called Kathopanishad. And it's a really wonderful Upanishad. It's about this little boy. Nachiketa is his name. His father is making the sacrifice, giving away all his possessions. And the little boy keeps asking, "Sir, I'm also your possession, am I not? When are you going to give me over?" And now for us it sounds like a very cute thing, but the father is in the midst of a big thing that he is doing. So at some point he's very, very angry. He says, and the boy asks him one more time, "Who are you going to give me away to?" And the father, Vajashravas, he says, "I'm going to give you to the god of death."
Yama.
Yama. Now, if I say it, nobody cares. Right? They say, "Oh, whatever." But if somebody like Vajashravas says it, then Yama says, well, I have to listen to him. Because the words of somebody that's very close to God cannot become untrue. The universe will be in chaos. So, the moment he says it, Yama comes and wants to take Nachiketa away. Vajashravas doesn't know what to do. But his words cannot become false. So he says, "Okay, well, I guess that's my karma." And Nachiketa goes. And then Yama says, "Your dad did something wrong. And you're about to die. It's really not your fault. It feels very unfair that you gotta die for the fact that your dad was angry. So I'm going to give you something. And I'm going to give you a boon. Ask me whatever you want." And Yama is kind of, he's giving a loophole here. He's saying maybe the boy will say, "Please give my life back." And he's ready to do it. But you know what Nachiketa says? 7-year-old boy. He says, "Lord, teach me the secret of self-realization." And the conversation between Yama and Nachiketa has become an extraordinary Upanishad called Kathopanishad. And in Kathopanishad, chapter 2, book 2, chapter 6, verse 11, we find the first mention of yoga. And you know what they say in Kathopanishad, when the god of death himself is teaching this enlightened young boy the secret of self-realization, he says, holding back of the senses is what is known as yoga. It's very simple. You feel like eating a lot of chocolate, don't eat it. That is yoga. It's a very straightforward way of looking at it. And then he says, then you have to become watchful, because one day you're good with it and the next day you're bad with it, because it comes and goes. Isn't that true? So Yama, the god of death, is telling Nachiketa, the self-realized young boy of 7, that this is what yoga is. So yoga starts all the way back 4,000 years ago with a conversation between Yama and Nachiketas. It's that old. So when you look at parampara of yoga, it comes from a place that's very, very refined. This is why, remember what Swami said, yoga comes to us from a higher age. That's what the meaning is. That it comes to us from such a refined place that anybody that wishes to do yoga, we should be aware of the extraordinary refinement of this practice. It's not simply breathing or stretching your hamstrings. You are really short-changing the value of what we have in front of us. Okay, everybody with me so far? Okay. There is another Upanishad called Shvetashvatara Upanishad. It's also part of Yajurveda. Much of what we know about Upanishads in general are part of Yajurveda. The other Vedas are a little short on Upanishads. I won't go too much into the history of Shvetashvatara, but just to say that the maximum amount of yoga that we know in prehistory, in antiquity, comes to us from Shvetashvatara Upanishad. So if you're somebody that really wants to know the original, absolutely original writings about yoga, go buy a copy of Shvetashvatara Upanishad. The Gorakhpur Press has a great copy of it in English and in Hindi, and you can read about it. I have, it's pretty amazing what's in there. And I won't read through this, but it does talk about breathing, alternate nostril breathing, for example. Okay? So this is the prehistory of yoga. We don't know when this was. We think it's about 4,000 years ago. Maybe it's 10,000 years ago. Maybe it's 3,000 years ago. We don't know. And then, if you ask the yogis, you go into any yoga ashram, come to us and ask Swami, say, Swamiji, how old is yoga? Swami says, why do you care? Just practice it. Right? That's what yogis always say. They don't care about chronology because the point of yoga is to kind of transcend all of those things. So you don't get a good satisfactory answer from yogis. Okay? So they say, how old is yoga? It doesn't matter, just practice it. But in historical times, for this we have good, solid historical evidence, and that begins approximately 2,700 years ago. And this is the time of the Bhagavad Gita, approximately. And around 2,400 to 2,700 years ago is the second great text on yoga, which is Patanjala Yoga Sutras, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So these we know more about. This is the classical period. Okay, so let's look a little bit more about what they say about yoga. Bhagavad Gita is it's interesting for any number of ways. But the most interesting part about Bhagavad Gita, which is, Lahiri Mahashaya began to talk about this back in the 1800s. And then later on, Yogananda and then Swamiji recalling Yogananda's words on this, they both wrote about this, that maybe Bhagavad Gita is a battle that actually happened. It most probably did. But that's not that important, Lahiri Mahashaya said. He said what's important is Bhagavad Gita is a perfect representation, a perfect allegory of the battle that we should fight. So it's cast as a story of the fight between Pandavas and Kauravas, but in reality it's the story of the battle we should fight. Think about it, everybody knows where the Bhagavad Gita happens. On the beginning of the Kurukshetra war, the night before, there are the 11 battalions of the Kauravas arrayed against the 7 battalions of the Pandavas, and Bhishma, the patriarch, is leading the 11 battalions of the Kauravas. Drishtadyumna, the son of fire, is leading the 7 battalions of the Pandavas, and Arjuna tells his charioteer Krishna saying, Lord, I wish to survey, I wish to do a recon mission, and I need to do reconnaissance of the battlefield. Please take me around. And then he goes around and he says, why should I fight? This is my uncle in there, this is my teacher in there, this is my cousin, I won't fight anymore. Then Lahiri Mahashaya and then later Yogananda and Swamiji, they said, well, think about this. You've said that I don't like where my life is going. I need to make a change. I just had a heart attack or something, whatever makes you change. And then you say, I'm going to begin to fight the battle of life starting tomorrow. And that night, you are about to go to bed, you're going to get up next day, 4 in the morning, start your yoga practice and pranayama and start feeding the poor, whatever you want to do. You're ready for your battle of life. And then you go look at what you have to do the next day, and then you say, wow, I have to give up coffee. I have to have a cold water bath. I have to stop associating my friends with whom I used to smoke and drink all the time. You know, that's Arjuna goes around. This is my teacher Drona. This is my cousin Duryodhana. This is my uncle Bhishma. And then just like Arjuna, we say, no, that's too hard. I'll just sleep in and ask for an extra cup of tea tomorrow morning. And then Krishna says, no, you're not allowed to do that. Kshudram hridaya daurbalyam tyaktvottishta parantapad. That hridaya daurbalyam, the weakness of the heart is kshudram, is so small. Toss it aside and arise. The Swami Vivekananda used to say this. He said, if there is one verse in the Bhagavad Gita that you want, it is Kshudram hridaya daurbalyam tyaktvottishta parantapad. So this is the dramatic setting of Bhagavad Gita. And you know, how many chapters does Bhagavad Gita have? Anybody know? 18. What is each chapter called? At the end of it, it is something followed by something. Anybody know? Every chapter has the same name. Yes, sir.
Yes, 9th chapter is very important. In 9th chapter, if you add one number, it is 10. If you subtract one number, it is 8. And in Bhagavad Gita, there are 18 sloks,
Right.
which are very important. They are the crisp of life.
So that is very good, but that's not my question. My question is, every chapter ends with something. The name of every chapter, anybody know what that is? Yoga. Yoga, very good. Every chapter. Arjuna Vishada Yoga, first chapter. Sankhya Yoga, second chapter. Karma Yoga, third chapter. And goes on. Okay? So, the entire Bhagavad Gita, this battle of life, is being described as one yoga after another. So, Bhagavad Gita is the main textbook of yoga that we have. Okay, everybody with me? So, in it, we have, very, very briefly, if you want to achieve anything in life, we have as human beings, we have only four skills that we can bring to it. One is our body itself, that we can work, we can lift a stone and build a house, we can cut down a tree, or we can plant a tree. So the yoga of working with the body and examining the motivation behind it is called karma yoga. The second thing we bring is our minds, our intellect. We can think through things, we can say this is right and this is wrong. The yoga of working with our intellect is called jnana yoga. The third thing we can bring is our feelings. In fact, it's the most powerful thing. The yoga of working with the feelings is called bhakti yoga. And the fourth thing we can bring is prana, the inner essence. And the yoga of working with prana is called raja yoga. So these are the four. And that is Bhagavad Gita. And we read a lot of things about yoga. Krishna tells Arjuna how to meditate. Okay? And Krishna tells Arjuna how to withdraw the senses, what can be done, and so on. Wonderful text. The Yoga Sutras. We had a class for about 3 hours yesterday on Yoga Sutras, but it's another wonderful text. Again, let me give you a quick flavor of Yoga Sutras. You can go to a bookshop and purchase a text on how the body is built. Okay? Any bookshop will sell you that text. It will say that all human beings have a heart, it's right at the center, slightly displaced to the left. We have 2 lungs, and then all the organs of the stomach, and so on. This is called anatomy, how the body is built. Yoga Sutras is a similar text for how the mind is built. And as far as we know, it's the only text which discusses the details of the mind in exquisite refinement. The amount of it talks about how the mind moves, when the mind moves, what are the components of the mind. Mon, the sensory mind, buddhi, the mind of discrimination, ahankar, the mind of possessiveness, and on and on. And then chitta, the mind of feeling. Then it talks about when which one moves and how you begin to quiet it down, what are the practices to do that, and all of that. That is Yoga Sutras. So between Bhagavad Gita and Yoga Sutras, there is everything that we need to know about yoga. Yoga Parampara, remember that it comes from the conversation between Yama and Nachiketas, the first, and then one of the other ancient Upanishads, down to Krishna and Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, and down to Patanjali in Yoga Sutras. Now I want to point out all these 4 people because of whom yoga was written. So one is Vajashravas, the father of Nachiketa. He was a householder. He was not a sannyasi. Okay? And second, Krishna. Of course he was a householder. Patanjali was a householder. So the lineage of yoga, sometimes we think yogis are just these people that go into a forest renouncing everything. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. Much of yoga that has come down to us says, do what you are doing and be a yogi while you are doing it. Somebody I was talking with today told me that Krishna says, yogaha karmasu kaushalam. It's the upaya, it's the act of doing whatever you are doing in the right way with God remembrance. So I really want to point out, part of the yoga parampara is not one of sannyas, but it is the one of being a householder. Okay, everybody with me? That's the classical yoga period. So let's go on. So from approximately from Patanjali's time period, which maybe was about 400 BC, until about 5th century, we really don't know what happened. This was the time of Mauryas and the Guptas and all of that time, Kanishka and all of them. We really don't know what happened. There is a lot of research going on in my own university where I'm studying. People are looking into it. Research is going on in England, everywhere. We just don't know what happened. There are no writings that survive. So that's about 900 years. Nothing. And then suddenly in 5th century, something amazing happens. There is a person named Matsyendranath. Okay? And his disciple called Gorakhnath. Between Matsyendranath, everybody, now Gorakhnath is a little bit more famous since last year after BJP won the elections in Uttar Pradesh and Adityanath became the CM because he was the head of the... Exactly. So we had a big, I was remarking to Hriman when I was here in India when that election happened. I said, well, yoga has got something to do with this entire election. But at the time, Matsyendranath and Gorakhnath together, somehow Hatha Yoga comes to us fully formed. What we know today is asanas, pranayamas, mudras, bandhas, kriyas, everything, not our kriya, but the yoga has a different set of kriyas like Kapalabhati and so on. They all come to us 5th century, fully formed, we don't know why. Okay? And it's called, this wasn't written about any time and in 5th century it just came. So, Matsyendranath's disciples are still around. If you Kumbh Mela is coming up in January 2019, and in every Kumbh Mela you'll see Nathpanthis, Kanpatha yogis. People love to see them on TV because they wear no clothes. It's the primary attraction, but they are part of a very long 1600-year Hatha Yoga tradition started by Matsyendranath. There are many other sects in there, but the biggest surviving one are the Nathpanthis. Okay, and then they practiced many of the serious Hatha Yoga practices. Not the asanas, they practiced some of the asanas, but not a whole lot. Okay? They practice extreme austerities, walking on fire, all that kind of stuff. That's mainly from them. And then later on it spread to Sri Shailam in the south and other places. But as far as we know, it comes from them in the 5th century. And Gorakhnath, his student, really took it farther. Alamnath, his student in the South India, took it even farther. There is the entire subcontinent is part of this yoga revolution. And around the 8th century, this whole thing transitioned into Tibet, where Buddhism adopted these traditions very, very deeply. In fact, it doesn't survive in India anymore, but the 7th century Buddhism had a lot of yoga techniques. It's called it's a part of Vajrayana Buddhism. And then after Shankaracharya came and Buddhists moved, this sect of Buddhists moved out. You can find them in Nepal now. That's why when you go to Nepal, it's actually possible to find some very deep instruction and yoga techniques in there. Okay? Now, between 500 AD to 1800 AD, there were many little books. These were in the form of palm leaf manuscripts. And you can find them. You can go to Bhandarkar Oriental Library in Pune, for example, Adyar Library in Chennai, and there is a library in Kolkata, I don't remember. You can go there and find all of these manuscripts. I won't read all of them, but on Hatha Yoga itself, there were very famous ones, like Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Goraksha Samhita, Shiva Samhita, Gheranda Samhita, and on and on. I'll talk about some of those in more detail in a few minutes. There is one book, it's called Kumbhaka Paddhati, and that teaches approximately 72 different pranayama techniques. Okay? There is a book called Amanaska Yoga. Man is mind, Aman is detaching the mind, Amanaska Yoga, and then it teaches a technique that's very similar to Hong Song. And you can see why Amanaska Yoga, that you are aware of the breath instead of being involved in the breath. So there's many texts. It's still being studied. We don't really know how many there are, but there are a lot of writings up to about the 18th century. Remember, until then, the printing press really didn't make it into yoga. Okay? These were all still written down on palm leaf manuscripts. Now, among these, I want to draw your attention to 4 of these, because this will come back to what Yogananda and Swami did as part of yoga. It's important. If you practice Ananda Yoga, then you need to understand this parampara in here. 4 of them are considered to be the best. In the 17th century, remember 17th century means 1600s. Okay, 17th century doesn't mean 1700s. So this approximately 420 years ago. There is something called Gheranda Samhita. In fact, this is, you go to any well-established yoga ashram, Bihar School of Yoga, Shivananda Ashram, Kaivalya Dham in Lonavala, or Prashanti Kutiram in Bangalore. You go to established yoga ashrams, this is probably the text. I had to study this quite a bit for my PhD. There is some really extraordinary information contained in there. The most famous one is from 15th century called Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Swami mentions this book several times here and there. And in 14th century is a text called Shiva Samhita. And in the 6th century is something called Goraksha Samhita. So you have texts. I have all 4 of these with me. These are all, the way they describe yoga is quite different from what you find in textbooks today. If you go to a bookstore and bought it, they really don't bear much of a resemblance. And that's the point of this talk. I want to help you reconcile those 2 things. Now let me tell you what happened in the modern times. Modern times means approximately 1850 or 1900s and onwards. Something very interesting happened. You know what happened in the 1900s that revolutionized yoga? Anybody want to guess?
Swami Vivekananda.
Yeah, no, that was with Raja Yoga, but for Hatha Yoga, you're right, he did. But for Hatha Yoga, something happened in the 19th century, which...
Sivananda.
No. You know what happened in 1900s? Somebody published the first printed book on yoga. That really revolutionized. You see, until now, it was only written down. So you had to go to somebody that had those manuscripts and learn from them. But somebody in Mysore published a printed book.
Iyengar.
No, his teacher. A good guess though. His Iyengar's teacher. Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya published the first, it was published in Kannada, which happens to be my language, so I'm very happy about this because I can read it and understand it. But in 1924, he published a book on yoga. Okay? That changed everything. Until then, people just had to come to India to learn it, or people like Yogananda and Vivekananda had to go there and teach it and so on. But once this happened, everything changed. Two things changed. One is, hundreds of thousands of people had access to yoga, which was a good thing. The second is, hundreds of thousands of people learned really bad yoga, which was a bad thing. Okay, both of those happened at the same time, because you can only learn so much from books. So there are three important yoga schools that started this revolution. One was in Mysore under Krishnamacharya. Other was in Rishikesh under Swami Shivananda. And the third major one, there were many teachers in Bengal at this time. I won't name all of them, of course. Yogananda being one of the greatest ones, and Vivekananda being another one, and they all have yoga schools associated with them, and there were several others. From these three important schools, yoga began to spread in a way that's hard to imagine. It spread very, very quickly. Within a span of 30, 40 years. See, when I was growing up in Bangalore, even in the 80s, my mother used to be a little scared of yoga. Okay, she said these are just odd practices. They are black practices. Vamachara was called. She said you really shouldn't practice it because whatever the reasons for it, it was just that people didn't know much about yoga, even in the 80s. But by then it had already changed. To imagine how it would have been in the early 1900s. It was all misinformation, what I guess today you'd call them fake news. It was all fake news about yoga, all kinds of stuff going on. But once the book got published, everything changed. So these three people changed it. And this literally was the book that Krishnamacharya wrote. This was in somebody's house, and I was able to find a photograph of it. So in 1934, he first published this book. It's really good. You can actually search on the web and find the PDF of the entire book. Those of you that are really into yoga, you should read this book. It kind of gives you explanation in a way that you wouldn't expect. And then in the 60s, 50s and 60s, there was Iyengar published a book called Light on Yoga, and for us in India that changed everything. If you were growing up learning yoga in the 70s and 80s, you had a copy of Light on Yoga, and if you don't have it, if you're interested in yoga, go buy it. It's a really good text, and I tell you why it had some unfortunate consequences. But if you know what you're doing, it's a really good text. Patabi Jois published a book called Yoga Mala, another wonderful text. And Swami Vishnu Devananda, primarily in the US, but also here, published a book called The Complete Illustrated Book of Yoga. It was Shivananda Yoga. So these three texts, when Krishnamacharya did his thing, yoga went from thousands of people to hundreds of thousands of people. With these three texts, it went to millions and millions and millions of people globally, everywhere. All these three books are still in print. You can buy them. They are that good. 60 years later, they're still very much in print. Okay? And then we have an extraordinary community of yogis across the world in the last 30 years. Now this is Yoga Parampara. What I just described to you is how yoga evolved. Now there are some unfortunate consequences with this, and I want to talk about that next. So something was lost. This is our studio in Seattle, by the way. This is one of our yoga classes there. You can see me doing yoga there too. Something was lost in the process. Let's take a look at what was lost, and this should give you a very good clue about how to approach yoga. Yoga was never primarily a physical practice, but when it began to be written down, the great teachers of yoga, Krishnamacharya and Iyengar and Patabi Jois and Vishnu Devananda and Shivananda, they could only write about the physical parts because the rest had to be learned. Like those of you that were in the class yesterday, there is a lot of value to learning it face to face, right? Because you can't really write it all down because each of us do yoga a little bit differently. If you learn it from an instructor that knows what they are doing, then they can say, for you this is the right thing, for you this is the right thing, and so on. So when it was written down, they just wrote the basic thing which might be applicable to everybody. So what happened when it was written down was people thought yoga was all about asanas. Okay? But the primary purpose of yoga, now remember, where does yoga come from? What is the oldest text we have from yoga? Anybody remember? Upanishad. Way back. See, yoga comes from a conversation between Yama, the god of death, and Nachiketas, the self-realized boy. What does that have to do with standing on your head or stretching your hamstrings? You have to wonder. This is also yoga, this is also yoga. What's going on? That was because when people wrote it down, they only wrote down a part of it. The rest of it, they said, come to a teacher, they'll teach you. But then that part was forgotten. The goal of yoga is to remember this is Raja Yoga. I said we have 4 faculties, the body, the mind, the feelings, and the energy. The goal of yoga, the Raja Yoga, was to work with the energy, do something very specific with it, to draw the energy inward. Remember, the god of death, Yama, says that yoga is controlling of the senses. How you control the senses is draw the prana into the Sushumna, Merudanda it is called, draw it into the Sushumna. That was entirely lost. Okay? Now, I'll tell you how it was lost, but let's look at this. I sat down, I had to do this for my PhD, one of the exams I took. They asked, how many asanas are described in the textbook Light on Yoga? It's a silly little question, but then I went and counted on all the books. The one on the right, you see this 120 here? That is the Krishnamacharya's book, the thing that started it all. He describes 120 asanas. Swami Shivananda, his Vishnu Devananda, describes 220 asanas. Pattabhi Joyce describes 220 asanas. Iyengar describes 200 asanas. That's a lot, right? And you have to wonder, do I have to do all of it? What do you guys think? How many should you do?
At the most 8 or 10. 8 or 10.
8 or 10. Okay. Any other answers? Depends on the individual. Roughly, ballpark. 5, 15, 22, 25. Okay, we got 10, we got 25. Any other? We have one more guess.
I would say it should start from 5.
Okay, so you say 5, you say 10, you say 25. Okay. Any other opinions on this? Okay. Now let's look at what. Remember, I said these older texts. Let's see what they have to say. How many asanas do they describe? This is all in the printed page. Before the printed page, when it was written down, how many asanas do they describe? Let's look at it. Remember Gheranda Samhita. How many asanas do you think it describes? That is closer to your number. 32.
I said 39.
You said okay. Sorry. So it's even closer to your number.
Is it between 25 and 30?
So it describes 32. Now, 15th century, Hatha Yoga Pradipika. 15 asanas, closer to you, sir. Okay. 14th century, Shiva Samhita. 4. One of those is actually Bhadrasana, what we saw in Indus Valley civilization. That's one of the 4. Okay, say Siddhasana, Padmasana, Bhadrasana, and Muktasana. So the 4 asanas. That's it. Nothing else. Okay? No Virabhadrasana, no Shirshasana, no Sarvangasana, nothing.
That's all it talks about, only 4.
That's all it talks about. 6th century, Goraksha Samhita. 2. Okay?
Which are the 2?
Siddhasana and Padmasana.
Oh.
Yeah, it's kind of getting close. It's what Yogananda used to say. All you need to know is how to sit up straight and keep your spine straight. That's it. Now let's go back 1,000 years more. Let's go to Yoga Sutras. How many asanas does Yoga Sutras describe?
1.
You think 1, right? You'd be wrong. 0. None. Shunya. Okay? going on? Something weird is going. Pick up a yoga text today. I will challenge you to find a yoga text that will describe less than 60 asanas. Okay, in fact, there's only one that I know of. It's called Art and Science of Raja Yoga. But everybody else describes way too many. So what's going on? What is really going on in this? You have to really internalize. Yoga is more than just asanas. It's a lot more. Let's look at what are the parts of yoga. There are 4 different parts of Hatha Yoga. There is a 5th one which is implied, but not talked about in Hatha Yoga, I talked about in Raja Yoga. This is one of our yoga students. He was very happy he took this photo. The first one are purification practices. See, yoga first and foremost is about detoxification. Anybody gone to a yoga clinic and they fed you a lot of salt water and then you had to vomit? Without anybody done that?
No, I've
Yes.
You've done that, was it good?
Yeah.
Very good, right?
Right.
Dude, it's not fun vomiting it, but after that,
Not in the beginning.
yeah, after that it's very good.
Yeah.
That's a purification practice.
Yeah.
The practice we did yesterday, Kapalabhati, that's a purification practice. Anybody done gazing at a flame? Trataka? That's a purification practice.
Jal Neti.
Jalaneti, exactly, water through one and the other. Very good, sir. Jalaneti is a purification practice. Bhasti is a purification practice. In our teaching hospital in Bangalore, it's a yoga hospital, you come there, for a large part of your treatment is purification. And this is actual Hatha yogic practices. You do, there's something called Shankha Prakshalana, Agnisara. The yoga master incorporated this into energization. Agnisara, for example, is part of energization. The stomach pumping is called Agnisara. That's a purification practice. Okay? So that's at the very heart of yoga. Then you have asanas. The job of purification is to prepare you for awakening. Just like when you have a guest coming home, the first thing you do is sweep the floor and do things like that, right? Then you start preparing food. So the asana is more like preparing food. It awakens your prana from within. Okay? That's why when you do asana properly, you end up feeling very, very light and revitalized and filled with a lot of energy because it awakens the prana. But imagine if you did it when you were ill. When the body is not pure, then the asana will make you feel worse. So you have to purify before you awaken. And the third one, now this is almost unknown now. These are called mudras and bandhas. These are very, very key in energization. When after you do the stomach pumping, when you draw the stomach in and hold, everybody know that?
Yes.
That's a lock. It's called Uddiyana Bandhana. Okay? And when you get your Kriya initiation, there are more locks that are taught, and some of those are some of the most ancient locks which have been mentioned in every single yoga text. Not since the 19th century, but in all the ancient yoga texts, these locks have been mentioned. But it's almost never taught these days. They're very, very important. Because locks draw the prana into the spine. Almost every standing yoga pose that you do automatically does a lock known as the root lock, Mula Bandha. And that's why at the end of standing poses you feel a strong compulsion to go inward. Okay? And then at the top of the yoga pyramid is something that's very, very unique to yoga. See, purifications, asanas and mudras, you can find them, for example, in Japanese martial arts. You can find them in Qigong in China. You can find them in Taekwondo in Korea. They're all incorporated there. But the last part is very unique to yoga, and that is pranayama. It's very, very unique to yoga, and that is what gives us control over the senses. Remember what Yama, the god of death, told Nachiketa? He said, control your senses. That is known as yoga. That is pranayama. So next time you sit down to do the breathing practice, remember that it comes, the parampara of pranayama is very, very long. Next time you think about becoming a disciple and taking Kriya Yoga, remember pranayama, so parampara goes all the way back to the origins of yoga itself. That's what yoga is. Now let's come to this question for which somebody said 10 and somebody said 25 and somebody said 32, 39. How many poses should you learn? Remember, what's the purpose of poses? Just to awaken your energy. Right? How many should you learn? Not that many, about 15 or so. More than enough. And see, somewhere between 15 and 30 is good enough. Just do those poses. You're, in general, okay. I have here key hatha yoga poses. I won't go into the details. I'll just leave it here for a minute for you to see this. These are just the key poses. That's all is necessary. You don't need anything more complicated. Learn to do them well, and you'll pretty much get all the benefits of yoga. But do more. Do your pranayama, for example, and then of course do your meditation at the end of it. That is yoga, remember. What about the other poses? What about all of these complicated poses that you see? Well, you can do them, you don't have to do them. It's up to you. You know, it's like if you go out on a run, your doctor says, run for 2 kilometers 3 times a week, and you feel like running 5, run 5. It's not a big deal. This is similar. If you're enthusiastic, do them. If not, don't do them. Really doesn't make a difference. That's why those of you that are yoga teachers, we teach only if you remember those of you that are yoga teachers, what are the poses you learn? These are roughly, there are a few that are here that you don't learn, but these are roughly the poses you learn. Okay? Yes?
This slide shows that Surya Namaskar can be used for purification.
Yes. Surya Namaskar can be, in fact, if you want to purify using bodily movement instead of vomiting, Surya Namaskar is much better.
The Khichdi Mudra,
Khichdi Mudra comes as part of the mudras and bandhas
yes,
that I talked about, and it's one of the best ones.
best one, but very difficult one.
Very difficult. Very difficult. You're exactly right. So it needs sadhana. Okay. Now, but it's not enough just to do the postures. You have to purify your body every now and then. How do you purify? So, I don't want to get into that discussion, but I just want to mention it, just to say it. On the path of yoga, the biggest purification really consists of 2 parts. One is eat less and eat the right food. Those are the 2 biggest purifications that you can do. How else do you purify? Do energization exercises, for example. It's really, really good way to purify. You should feel once when you do the energization exercises that something is awakened in you. It's not something you just cannot do with no mind put into it. Do it with the full mind. Involve your whole body. Learn to control the exact muscular tension, and then energization exercises can purify you very, very well. Yogananda used to say that energization harmonizes the 5 pranas in the body. Prana, apana, samana, udana and vyana. The 5 energies in the body are all harmonized with energization. So that's another great way to purify. And if you have something really deep going on, then you can visit yoga people and then they can tell you other ways to purify. About Bhujangasana, those of you that were there yesterday, great way to purify. Okay, so and then do a few asanas, some 15, 20, 25, that's about it. Not every day, but put them in your repertoire. Put them as part of the things that you know. Learn about 20 asanas really well. That should be more than enough. I myself don't do more than about 20. That's really, I don't find the need to. It gets to be distracting. Bandhas, locks, do them. Those are important. I mean, we'll teach them as, we call them mudras and bandhas, although I say bandhas here. They are mudras and bandhas. About 2 to 3 of them. It's certainly, if you're on the path of Kriya, they are taught for you. They are very, very, very deep. Probably one of the deepest parts of yoga. Energization, like I said, incorporates a few bandhas. Your asanas when you do sarvangasana, those of you that do that, it incorporates a bandha called Jalandhara bandha, which slows the heart rate down. Nadi Shodhana Pranayama, when you do that, it incorporates a bandha into into that as well. So they are present all over the place, but they are a very important part of yoga. And most importantly, do pranayama. You can do a few pranayamas, but your best path into pranayama is kriya. There are others too. I just don't want this to sound like an advertisement for kriya. It certainly isn't. It really is a discussion of yoga parampara. But you can find other schools offering these mudras, bandhas, pranayama as well, but they are very few and far in between. There are two other schools that offer any kind of instruction on it. One is Bihar School of Yoga. It's in Munger, Bihar, but you can find books from them all over the place. But remember, don't learn from books. And then the second one is Kaivalya Dhama in Pune. Those two are actually very, in addition to us, they are very full-fledged in terms of sticking to the ancient yogic tradition. Now let's go look at the ancient texts one more time. Can everybody see that table down there? I have told you how many purifications, asanas, bandhas and pranayama there are. Can you see how there are so many pranayamas and bandhas that are taught in the ancient text? You see, that's what yoga is. It is about learning to control your energy and working with your breath and drawing the energy inward. Asanas are just a recent emphasis which didn't exist in the past. For those of you that want to do yoga and you feel, well, maybe my body is not ready for it, I'm not flexible. Well, you don't have to be. That's not the point of yoga. It doesn't matter what your age is. There is something you can find in here that will be profoundly meaningful for you, and something that you can do which will take you inward. Okay? Everybody with me? Okay. See, this is why it's important to understand.
What are the four pranayams that were there in 6th century?
Mm-hmm.
What are those four pranayams?
I don't remember. I know Nadi Shodhanam is one of them for sure. I don't remember the others.
Yeah.
Well, Anulom Vilom is different. Anulom Vilom, no, they seem, yeah, it looks like Anulom Vilom. That is, I don't know the other three.
But Acharya, one question I have. How do we know which is like which would be apt for us? See, if I know I'm not flexible enough, then how do I know which is?
You have to learn from an instructor, from a good instructor.
Body instinct.
Yeah. Okay. Now let me talk about Ananda Yoga a little bit, and I'm going to tie it all together. There's, we have photos of Yogananda practicing yoga and well, not practicing but teaching yoga. You can easily find it on the internet. And there are other things where it is said that he learned many yoga techniques when he was a boy. So those of us that are disciples of Yogananda, Hatha Yoga is certainly part of our lineage. And then Swami Kriyananda was writing his book, Yoga Postures for Higher Awareness, at the same time that these other books by Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois were being written. And Swamiji decided to write it a little bit differently. Okay? So this book, he wrote it in 1967, and in that book, he places equal emphasis, not just on asanas, but also on mudras, bandhas, pranayamas. It's right there. And then he said what goes on in the mind is just as important with what goes on in the body. So don't do asanas while you're being distracted. When you're angry with someone, just bring a proper mind. Just like when you go into prayer, bring a proper mind. So he introduced something called affirmations, that every pose has to affirm something very, very high. It's like a mantra for asana. You take an asana, add a mantra to it, that becomes affirmations. And then he said it's not enough to just be tense while you are doing asanas, you have to find calmness. Okay? These are things that we do in life. It's, if you have a relationship with somebody and then you inwardly you're really angry but outwardly you're agreeing with them, they say, no, that's fake. I want you to really like what I'm saying. This is the same here too, that you have to be relaxed and calm when you're doing the asanas. Don't pretend to do them. do them properly. So Swamiji brought all of these, and then he said, you just know why you are doing asana. You're not doing asana for any smaller purpose. You're doing it to do better meditation, better dhyana. That is the whole point of it. So he was very, very clear. Later on, in the late 70s, I think, he wrote this book called Art and Science of Raja Yoga. Now look at the numbers in that book. In that he teaches 3 of the purification practices, 42 asanas, 4 bandhas, and 8 pranayamas. That there is equal emphasis placed on all parts of yoga, not just the asanas. I wonder, I taught a course based on this book for maybe 10 years. I always wondered, Swamiji could have written any book that he wanted to. He could have written a book that was for asanas as comprehensive as Light on Yoga, but he chose not to. And it didn't occur to me until I started studying the older text that Swamiji was very clear that he wanted asanas to be very representative of how it used to be 300 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Parampara, lineage, because remember, yoga comes from the conversation between the god of death and Nachiketas. It has a very refined purpose. So, my point here is that when you practice Hatha Yoga, practice a few asanas, but just as important, keep the body pure with eating, moderation in the eating and eating the right things, whatever that might mean for you. And after you practice it, practice the mudras and the bandhas, which we certainly teach you here. I mean, if you're a Kriyaban, then you got this whole thing already. If you do the practices of Kriya, it's exactly this one. Asana pranayama, asana mudra bandha pranayama. It's nothing else. But if your path is something else, go look for it. It's very important. Go look for it. We come here to practice Ananda Yoga. We teach those things as part of Ananda Yoga. Our practice energization, much of it is already inside of it. So that is part 1. Part 2, which is equally important, Yoga Parampara, the lineage of yoga, basically says that don't stop by just doing Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga is the meal that you prepare. Actually eating the meal is called as meditation. Okay, Hatha Yoga Pradipika is the most famous text of all the ancient texts. The very first verse of Hatha Yoga Pradipika says that the purpose of Hatha Yoga is Raja Yoga. Without Raja Yoga, Hatha Yoga is useless. So that's what it says. And then this later on it says, in order to do this, body needs to be pure. How can the energy enter into the Sushumna if the body is impure? So there you have it. You purify, do yoga in order to meditate. Okay? So Yoga Parampara is one of purification, drawing the energy inward so that you can meditate. Thank you. Okay, are there any questions?
We are all positive. The question is that the whole thing seems to be so tough. The Hatha Yoga part seems to be so difficult, especially for people who have crossed a certain age and the flexibility of the body.
Asanas are difficult, but you don't have to practice them.
Yeah.
Just 1 or 2 is enough.
Yeah.
You see, that's the whole point, is you don't have to. It's a misconception that you have to do that many.
If the original asanas were not so many, so it's just people just kind of created their own thing over it.
No, I'm not sure. I've thought about it. I can only tell you my opinion. I think those asanas were just taught when you went to the ashram. They were just taught. It wasn't a big deal, and later on, when people wrote them, they just wrote those preparatory practices. That's what I think.
Sir, my lungs are contracted and doctor advised that you take slow asanas just like Hong So or Om technique, like that. But Kriya, if you will do it, it may harm further. So is it true or the lungs can be repaired somehow through asanas?
So, it's probably not a question for me to answer because I don't have the expertise on either side of it. So you have to talk with one of the Kriyacharyas and talk to the doctor. So I don't know. That's beyond what I know. Anything else?
We'll save our questions for next time. We'll explore more about yoga and then you visit
Okay.
again. We'll have questions, lots of questions.
Okay.
Surya Namaskar, the Ashtam, the plank pose. like-
Yeah, Sashtanga Namaskar.
How can we prepare for that? And because that you need a strong
Challenge.
core and it's the most challenging part.
Very good. There are three things that you can do. One is do Navasana, boat pose. It's a very good preparation. Next is do plank pose. Yeah. What we do at the yoga teacher training in Seattle, we start, yoga teacher, we start with 30 seconds of plank pose, and by the time YTT is done, we do about 2 minutes. And it's a really good preparation. Third one is Vasishthasana, side plank. So those three are very, very good. Okay.
2 minutes of Vasishthasana.
That I don't know. I don't think we do that.
In the series of numbers, when it came to Shunya and 2, could you just tell us about the Shunya and 2?
Well, very good question. Shunya, why does Yoga Sutras, which is the source book of all yoga, why does it describe 0 poses? Because all the other books are actual books. They are descriptions. Yoga Sutras are sutras, meaning they are just theorems, they are formulas. So what Patanjali says, he gives the formula for all yoga poses, no matter what the pose is. Sthira Sukham Asanam, every yoga pose, no matter what it is, whether it's 2, 4, 32, or 39 in your case, it's always Sthira, combination of strength, and Sukham, flexibility. So he just gives you the formula. That's why it's 0. Okay, does that make sense?
Thank you.
Good question.
So, okay, as my friend here asked you the question, the age factor also has to come in while talking about the different asanas, etc., or age doesn't matter and any person of any age can do any asana.
No, you have to be careful about what is appropriate for your age. But generally, almost all people can find something to do. Maybe they cannot do everything, and they shouldn't do, but almost everybody can find something to do. Okay, so when it's not just age, you could be younger and you could have some injuries. So, yeah, they are both the same thing. So you have to learn from a teacher what the right thing to do for your body is. But there is almost always something to do, which is very useful. Okay? Okay, one more question before we stop.
Yes, there is a yogi in Ayodhya. He is 120 years old, 120 years old, and he claims that he will live in this world for 1000 years.
Wow.
It was in the paper. I have got the cutting in my pocket. If you like, I can show you.
Wow. You know, we have so much evidence of yogis living for a long time. Trailanga Swami lived, he was in Lahiri Mahashaya's time. He was born in 1607 and he lived up to 1887. So it's,
Thailand Swami,
yeah,
Varanasi.
of Varanasi. And there are many other evidence of that. And of course, for us, we have, in our lineage, we have Babaji.
Babaji.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Ageless yogi.
ageless yogi.
That's less.
Yeah. So, thank you everybody. It's a lot of fun. That's wonderful.
you.
So anybody who wants, you guys can all go to
against Murali, I'll take a picture.
Yeah.
Like you stay there and everybody
Okay.
will just go over there, or maybe you could stand, that would be easier for people to see. Maybe you should stand on the chair.
I'm sure we can find a table, Marley.
Okay.
Everybody will
Okay. This feels really odd.